We're learning this week that top secret intelligence documents related to Ukraine, the UK, and Iran were found in Joe Biden's private D.C. office for a think tank named after him at the University of Pennsylvania. While the discovery of the classified documents at the Penn Biden Center may sound shocking and reminiscent of the discovery of Trump's possession of classified docs at Mar-a-lago, the way in which both discoveries were handled by law enforcement and the media are very different. Robert Spencer, author of the new book, The Sumter Gambit, joins us now to take a look at why they're being handled so differently, especially by the media. Robert, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So we have this discovery or announcement of these documents that were found in the Penn Biden Center, or we're just learning about these documents. Can I get your thoughts on the announcement of this and how it differs than what we were learning about the documents at Mar-a-lago?
It's a good glimpse into the two-tier justice system that we have in America today. Trump's indictment, they're going to try to bar him from running for public office as a result of the classified documents that were supposedly found at Mar-a-lago. Whereas Biden, they're running interference for. And CNN had a graphic saying that it was really no big deal. And they're covering for him every which way. This is solely and wholly because Biden is a leftist and part of the political elites, and Trump is not.
What I would like for you to give us a better understanding for the regular public, we don't understand why this is happening, why anyone at any media organization would be covering this up and not telling the truth. I know that sounds naive, but honestly, I think that's how general public feels.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And more people are waking up to the fact that the establishment media is basically just a propaganda arm for the Democrat Party and for the left in general. But you're right, most people still assume that they're giving us the straight news. The fact is, however, that what we have, and this is no exaggeration or hysteria or hyperbole, this is just the reality, is actually the beginning of the formation of a fascist state in the United States. Fascism is characterized by not having the government's means of production, as in communism, but in controlling the means of production, which are still in private hands. And that's exactly what we're seeing with the Biden administration, working with big tech and working with other corporations to silence dissenters and to marginalize and render insignificant the main political opponents that they face. And so this is just another example of that the establishment media is happy to work with the Biden administration to minimize this classified document story because they're all on the same team and part of the same club.
I think that the word fascism is thrown around a lot. And I don't think people have a clear idea or a simple idea of what it is. Can you explain?
You're right. This is very important because the left calls American patriots fascists, but they are engaging in the old tactic of accuse your enemy of what you yourself are guilty of, because they're the real fascists. Fascism, as I said, is an authoritarian government that is characterized by the government working hand in hand with the big privately owned corporations. In communism, they seize the privately owned corporations and the government owns everything. But in fascism, they just make sure that the corporations are working in lockstep and doing whatever they say. So it ends up being the same outcome as communism, an authoritarian government where everything is dictated by a small oligarchy. But nominally, the corporations are still in private hands. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. The news media, the social media giants, the educational system, the entertainment industry, all working with the far left, which is also in control of the government, for the same goals.
How did this happen? How did we get here?
Well, it was a complicated thing, really, because, of course, it's not quite the same thing as a fascist state like Nazi Germany, where the government actually called in the heads of the industries and threatened them and warned them that they had to work with the government. In this case, It was a willing that the big tech organizations and the media, they're happy to work with the government as long as the government is in Democrat hands, because really it started 50 years ago with the long march through the institutions and the takeover of the educational system by the left. And so now we have in all the powerful positions the products of that education. And so they think that authoritarianism is good, that stamping out dissent is good because it's working against what they call hate speech and disinformation and so on. And so they're happy to work with the government to crush dissent and to establish what is essentially a one-party system.
I know you have talked a lot about the speech that President Biden gave back in September. Can I get your thoughts on what was said and the imagery of that?
Yeah, people who think that this is crazy and who think that this is way out of any rational thinking should study that speech, because that was a fascist speech in the sense that he is saying that, well, what he said was explicitly that Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans are a threat to the very life of the republic. Now, this was the first time that an American president had ever said that half of the electorate and his primary opponent were outside the bounds of acceptable political discourse. The only analogy to that speech was Adolf Hitler's speech in the Reichstag in 1933, when he said that the communists were a threat to the life of the republic and had to be outlawed as a result, because he said they were responsible for the Reichstag fire of February 27th, 1933. Joe Biden is saying that the MAGA Republicans are responsible for the January 6th so-called insurrection. Now, he's not saying we have to be criminalized yet, but when he says that we're a threat to the very life of the republic, then the other shoe that drops is that it becomes a criminal act to be a MAGA Republican. And if he's consistent, that's where he's going.
Well, we have the January 6th committee. Now we have the House in Republican hands. We have these new rules that are in order, and it remains to be seen what is going to happen. What do you want to see happen?
What we need to see is a real January 6th committee. Now, I don't know if Kevin McCarthy is going to do this, but if I were Speaker of the House, and I would accept the job, thank you, to call me and we'll set it up. But in any case, if there were a real January 6th committee, then it would be investigating how this whole January 6th business has been trumped up, so to speak, in order to demonize Republicans and Trump supporters and make them out to be insurrectionists who want to overthrow the republic. There is absolutely no basis for that. Nothing happened on January 6th that actually gives credence to that. There were some people who were let into the Capitol and they went around snapping selfies, and they had no weapons, they had no leader, they had no plan. If this was going to overthrow the government, then the government's pretty weak. There is no chance they could have overthrown the government. Zero, less than zero. And so the real insurrection is the House committee itself that is trying to portray this as some threat to the republic. And so Adam Schiff, Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, those people need to be investigated. Nancy Pelosi, all the rest of them. Now, whether this is going to happen, I would highly doubt this is going to happen. But that's the real investigation we need to see.
I think the sticking point is that the questions may be asked and people may go up there, but will the media report anything?
And here again, the media is not interested in the news. The media is interested in furthering the Democrat Party narrative. And so, no, they're not going to report. You know, just like Hunter Biden's laptop doesn't exist, even though it's not about his dirty pictures. It's about that he was clearly selling influence and access to his father. And that ought to be something that should open a corruption investigation for both father and son. But the media doesn't tell you that.
So why doesn't the media want to report this?
Because the media is part of this entire establishment machine. It's not an independent entity that is out to get the news and ferret out the story like we saw in the movies in the 40s. There aren't any people like that. There aren't any journalists anymore. Even Woodward and Bernstein and all the President's Men, there are no intrepid reporters meeting guys in parking garages and getting the secret story. It's not happening. What we have is rather a press agency for the Democrat Party. Now, how has this happened? Well, you look at who are the people in the news media. George Stephanopoulos, Jen Psaki, Adam Kinzinger just joined CNN. It's on and on and on. You never see Trump administration officials going to work for CNN or MSNBC or any of the rest of them. It doesn't happen. But there's constant flow back and forth between Democrat administrations and the media because it's all one big club.
Do you think that Elon Musk and Twitter and what is happening over there is going to have any long-lasting, deep effect? I'm pretty shocked at the, I don't want to say indifference, but to me, what's coming out of the Twitter files is, it's blowing me away as a journalist, as someone who wants to protect free speech. I can't believe that so many people are kind of nonchalant about it.
Well, they're nonchalant about it because they're so thoroughly propagandized. Elon Musk has shaken things up already, and the Twitter files ought to be the biggest story of the 21st century, bar none, that the United States government that is supposed to be bound to protecting the freedom of speech as per the First Amendment has multiple times worked with big corporations to silence individual Americans who dissent from the establishment line. That is quintessentially fascist, and that is what the US government has been doing, and it just doesn't exist for this media because they are in the pocket of the administration, or the administration is in their pocket, and it's all works. They're all working for the same goals.
So tell me a little bit about your book. I know you're from South Carolina, the Sumter Gambit. So I would love to learn a little bit more about your book and where people can get it and the thesis.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Charleston, and that's interesting that not many people know that. But in Charleston, you know, there's Fort Sumter right there. The Battery, I've walked there thousands of times, and you see the cannons fired that fired on Fort Sumter still there. And the story of the beginning of the Civil War is that Lincoln didn't want to fire the first shot, and he wanted to maneuver in starting the war. And nowadays, I'm not saying that the Confederates were the good guys or anything of that kind, but nowadays the left is trying to push us into starting the war by pushing us into a situation where it looks as if we have to strike back in some violent manner. And then they can use that as a pretext to further their authoritarian agenda. And so the Sumter Gambit, the name of the book, is the idea that the left is trying to push the right into a civil war. And one of the primary examples of this is just what we've been discussing, and I discuss it at length in the book, that branding half of the electorate as being insurrectionists and being outside the bounds of what is acceptable discourse is designed to push us into thinking that we have no recourse within the system and that we have to strike against the system itself. And then they can use that strike to say, see, they really are insurrectionists and we got to lock them up now, or whatever, or very least criminalize our point of view, the America First patriotic point of view. And so we can't play their game. We have to continue to work within the system in every way possible. And Elon Musk is one example of how that can open up in unexpected ways.
Don't you think that there has to be a few, and for lack of a better term, patriotic yet very peaceful people who step forward as leaders so that they are examples that people can follow so that they don't take the bait.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And for that, there need to be people who are aware of what the game is. And that's what the book's about. That most Americans don't realize, and even most people on the right don't realize what game the left is playing. And, you take, for example, cancel culture. And for years, there have been people who've been targeted by the left. And all too often, conservatives have played along with that and acted like the people that the left says are toxic and shunned them as a result. And I myself am a victim of this because one of the earliest arenas of it was the war on terror. And I was writing about jihad violence, and the left said, oh, if you oppose jihad violence, you're Islamophobic and racist. And so many people on the right, I could name names, but I'm not going to blow up my own side. But so many people on the right started to shun us because they were afraid of getting the same treatment from the left. We got to stop playing their game. We've got to stop letting them set the rules.
And I think that's the point, is that it cannot be a left or a right fight any longer. People have to come together.
This is a free people versus authoritarians fight. And there ought to be people who have leftist points of view on social issues or whatever, who realize that they don't want to live under an authoritarian regime. And that's what the Biden administration is working toward. And once again, that sounds crazy, but this is not hyperbole. You look at that speech, that was a quintessentially authoritarian speech. To say that half the country is an enemy of the state, that's authoritarianism.
Okay, so to extrapolate that, is the reason why we're moving to authoritarianism, or that's your belief, is that happening because of the WEF and Davos and this one world government? Is that the reason why this is happening?
Yeah, probably that has a lot to do with it. But certainly the impetus can be found closer to home as well. I mean, when you have the Biden administration working with Twitter to silence people who speak about COVID in a way they don't like, that's not my view. That's clearly the Biden administration working to silence Americans who are dissenting from the Biden administration's agenda. Now, whether they're doing that because the World Economic Forum wants them to, or some other globalist entities want them to, well, that would certainly be consistent with their erasure of the southern border and their disregard for American sovereignty. And so there is reason to believe that. But it's very clear that the people who run this administration and the people who run the social media giants, they don't believe in the freedom of speech. They don't believe in legitimate opposition. They want to crush everybody who opposes them.
So if you are going to make an argument to the everyday person about why they should care and become, I don't even want to say politically active, maybe just politically aware, literate, what would your argument be? Because I think there's so much screaming from one side, the other side, all around. I want us all to be calm and understand what is happening, or try to understand what is happening so that we can take steps in our everyday lives.
It's very important. And I would say that the lessons of the past in people dealing with authoritarian regimes should be recalled today. That the famous statement from, I believe the guy was Pastor Niemöller in Nazi Germany, and he said, first they came for the trade unionists, and I wasn't a trade unionist, so I didn't say anything. And then they came for this group, and then they came for that group, and then they came for the other group. And then when they came for me, there was nobody left to speak out. Well, you may not like the people who were banned from Twitter. You may believe what the government says about COVID, and you don't like Alex Berenson from the COVID agenda. But if they can silence him and 1,000 others for various other infractions, they can silence you. There's nobody who's exempt from this. And there may come a time when what you see is not what the government says. And what you believe to be true is not what the government wants you to believe to be true. And then, do you want to have the freedom to be able to speak freely and publicly about your position? Or do you think that the government ought to be able to silence you and take away your bank account and impoverish you? And these things are happening. These things are not, this is not craziness. These things are happening in the United States right now. In 2018, because I opposed jihad violence and Sharia oppression of women, MasterCard said they would not take donations to my organization. Now, that's one guy, and you may not like what I do, and you may not like me at all. But if they can do it to me, they can do it to you, and they can do it to anybody. And it won't just stop with them saying we won't take your donations. They took General Flynn's bank account away at Chase and said we won't carry your account here. Okay, well, they're a private company, right? I mean, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about fascism. But if they can do that to Flynn because they don't like him, then what is he going to do? He can go to other banks. And what if they all decide that Chase is right and they're not going to take his account? And then you have the prospect of dissenters being completely impoverished and not being able to transact any business in the United States. And we're far closer to that than people realize. It's already starting.
In the United States of America. Unbelievable. Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. The book, The Sumter Gambit. And where can people get it?
It's going to be at Amazon in a few days. Right now, it's available at conservativereaders.com. Conservativereaders.com. You can order it today.
Well, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. A lot of things to think about, and I love how you break things down for us regular folks. I appreciate that, and I will certainly be doing my homework as we move forward in these very difficult times.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Thank you.